Are you having trouble finding the perfect tent for your next expedition? Are you doing the rounds at the moment? You're looking for a new tent. You want to find something that is bomb-proof, that is going to survive those windy days, those rainy days on your next trek? Well, today we are diving deep into the world of SlingFin, and more specifically, the SlingFin Portal 3. Now, I have just returned from a 9-day off-track, very hard expedition into rough, untracked terrain here in Tasmania, Australia, and I really put this tent through its paces. So stay tuned to find out if this tent stands up to the Adventure Allen blog Most Bomber Tent Award 2024. Let's get straight into it. Let's look at the SlingFin Portal 3. Hi everyone, welcome back. Mauser here. Now, I have just returned from an epic 9-day expedition. You'll get videos on that later. But on that expedition, we have taken the SlingFin Portal 3 through a comprehensive range of tests and have returned with a comprehensive review of this tent. This tent has seen it all. It's seen gale force winds, heavy rain, hot sun, and today we're just going to break it all down and have a look at how this tent performed on its first big expedition. From its weight to its weatherproofing capabilities to its performance in high winds, and we'll even see how it fares when you add in some trekking poles to add a bit of extra stability and report support. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this first gear review of the SlingFin Portal 3. It's good to be back. So first up, a bit of background. Now, I have been hiking in not only Tasmania, but all sorts of places around the place for over 30 years. And in that time, from the days when I used to have to borrow a tent, I can't even remember what that tent was. I have used MacPack tents, I have used Terra Nova tents, I have used MSR tents, I have used Big Agnes tents, and that's just to name a few. And while each one of these tents has found its way into my heart and come on many trips over those years, and I've found them all generally to be good tents, there is sort of one common thread, one sort of nagging sort of pain point that I find with each of those tents. What is that, you ask? Well, it is their performance in strong winds. It's been a pretty rough night, very, 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 very windy. That's how I would describe it. Wind, in strong wind. Winds? Is it winds or is it wind? Anyway, strong wind.
I'm a little bit anxious to get out and check the damage of the tent because it doesn't look too good. A few broken or bent poles out there, but I'm pretty keen to sort of get going and get off the range down to Lake Rona because...
And for this particularly grueling off-track 9-day expedition that I have just been on, I wanted a good, strong 3-season tent that could stand up to the potential gale force winds that I may experience on some mountaintop ridges and the like. But I also didn't want something excessively heavy built for the far reaches of Antarctica or somewhere like that. I wanted a little bit of an in-between. Now, as I do, I'm always looking at new gear, and for this particular tent, I was looking around for quite a while. So as I was looking around at my different options, at the different tents that were available, I found myself looking at the same old brands and tents that I had looked at in the past. But then I remembered a comment from a fellow YouTuber on one of my videos, a guy by the name of Aaron Gray. G'day Aaron. Check his channel out, it's cool, great expeditions. But he commented on one of my videos that he liked his SlingFin tent. And I quote, "I am a huge fan of SlingFin tents. They generally use higher quality fabrics, silicon/silicon, I'll explain that in a minute, and have some great features for bad weather, e.g. being able to attach hiking poles to strengthen the tent." He went into a bit of other stuff in there, but that name just rang in my head, SlingFin. So that sort of was just in the back of my mind, and occasionally I would go and look at SlingFin at their website, US-based company making high-quality tents. And I actually really heard of them before, I don't think. But through my research over a few months, I just found myself coming back to them again and again. And there's not a whole lot of reviews or videos online about the SlingFin brand. But from what I could find, they looked like a great tent. There was a few features I really liked about them, and I thought, why not? So a couple of months ago, I bit the bullet. I ordered a SlingFin Portal 3, and there it was. My tent for this trip was secured. I was taking it. The SlingFin Portal 3 was coming along. As a quick aside, I am not sponsored by SlingFin. They didn't provide this tent. I bought this tent with my own money. They have not contacted me at all to do a review, anything like that. I'm doing this off my own bat because I have found this a good tent to use. And as another side point, links to all the stuff I mentioned in this video are below. And if you do buy via those links, I may get a commission via my affiliate status. Just got to mention that, but this review isn't influenced by any of that at all. So what other things I love about this tent, and also what are some of the things that I'm not so much a fan of? We'll go through all of that through this video, but first let's look at the design of the tent and how it fared on this trip. So first, a few stats from the SlingFin website. SlingFin. I have to say it slowly. SlingFin. I just, blah, 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 you know? So first up, the Portal 3, my selection. They do make a Portal 2, two-person. This is the Portal 3, suggesting it is a 3-man tent. And it does impress with its weight. The SlingFin Portal 3 weighs in on my scales at 2,242 grams, 2.242 kilograms, which is this much in imperial measurements. That weight, I should point out, does include the additional ground sheet which I purchased for this tent. And for all you guys counting the grams, just here is a breakdown of each component of the tent according to my scales and what it weighs. We've got the ground sheet, we've got the inner tent itself, we've got the fly, we've got the poles, we've got the pegs. The pegs is the pegs, guy lines, that sort of stuff. Now, in deciding on this tent, weight was a fairly crucial factor. As always with these big, long expeditions, I go on of 9 days off track, self-supported. I wanted something that was reasonably lightweight, not too heavy, but was also going to be able to withstand the harsh conditions I experienced out there. Now, admittedly, this was its first trip. This was a 9-day expedition, but we did experience a huge different range of weather. The only thing we didn't experience was snow, but we experienced everything else. We experienced heavy rain, torrential rain. We experienced really strong winds, some extremely gale-forced winds throughout the trip. We were often in exposed campsites, copying the full force of the wind from the roaring 40s here in Tasmania. So I am fairly confident that this 9-day trip was a great testing ground for this tent. I am supremely confident it's going to be coming with me on many, many future trips. Now, a few other stats. Floor area is 41.5 square feet. That's 3.86 square meters. It's comparable to something like a Big Agnes Copper Spur HVUL3 or an MSR Hubba 3. Very similar dimensions. This one has a slightly bigger vestibule area than the Big Agnes at 0.96 square meters or 10.3 square feet. Now the website says that its floor dimensions are 92 inches by 68 inches at the head and 62 inches at the foot. Now, I didn't actually notice a taper in this tent. I've set it up a few times. I've had it out in the track and I've set it up in my backyard as well, and it's saying it's got a taper on it, but I'm gonna have to set it up again and check that out because I actually thought it was pretty uniform in width the whole length of the tent. I will confer with Croft, who shared the tent with me on this trip, see what he thinks. But yeah, even if it does have a taper, we didn't particularly notice it. We found that it had plenty of room for 2 people, and that is the other point. I did not buy this as a 3-man tent. I bought this as a comfortable, roomy 2-man tent. I've gone into that on other videos. I am yet to find a 3-man tent that really fits 3 men nicely. My old Mother Hubba is the closest thing I have found, one from about 12, 13 years ago. We were able to fit 3 blokes my size into that quite nicely, but I'm yet to find a bigger one. I'll look into that on another video. Like I said, the vestibules, they're a nice size, comparable to something like the Hubba 3, the Big Agnes Copper Spur 3. It has 2 doors, which is what I like, side doors, so you can each use your own entrance. It's just a prerequisite for me. If there's going to be 2 people in a tent, I need to have a door on each side or at each end of the tent. So we've got separate entrances, especially on rainy days. One of the big selling points for me was the number of guy points for guy lines on the tent. There are 10 on this tent. There are 2 on each corner and 1 on each apex of the fly, basically. So that is 10 guy points. There are also 2 internal guy lines. I haven't used a tent with internal guy lines before, but I do feel they made a difference. So it does come with 2 sets of internal guy lines. They're sort of crisscrossed like this. So it comes with 1 set already set up at one end of the tent. So they are crisscrossed like this at one end, and it comes with additional guy lines you can set up yourself at the other end. And I did set them up myself at the other end as well. And the idea with the internal guy lines, according to SlingFin, is that they give greater lateral stability. So when you get those lateral crosswinds, those blustery conditions, it just sort of helps the tent keep its shape a bit better. And what it does is transfers the weight from the poles down into the, or from the tent down into the stakes in the ground, transfers that force down to the stakes in the ground. So they say. I do think they actually made quite a difference on those really blustery days for us. So I think they were worthwhile. And it certainly doesn't hurt to have them there. It adds no weight. And I do think they made a difference. In terms of tent stakes, or pegs as we call them here in Australia, it comes with 10 DAC J stakes. Now, in addition to those, I also threw in a few MSR groundhog stakes. I think I threw in 2 of them and 4 MSR carbon core stakes, the longer ones. I just like to use those carbon core stakes because they're quite long. They're around 15 centimeters long at least, I think. They just allow you to really get a good anchor in. When you're on a bit of softer sort of soil or ground, I can really drive them into the ground and it really just holds the tent down well. And they're very lightweight, great tent stakes. So I use them as well as a couple of groundhog stakes. So in total, I carried 16 stakes with this tent. We used most of them most of the time. For each of the 2 guy lines on each corner of the tent, I would tie the 2 guy lines on the corner to 1 stake. If you wanted to, you could use 2 separate stakes for each corner. I didn't think that was necessary, but that's a personal thing. That worked really well. And another thing I absolutely love about this tent, it was a factor in me buying this tent as well, is the fact that the fly sheet attaches to the poles with a toggle system, not with the regular Velcro system that you see on a lot of tents. So for each corner of the tent where the fly is coming down over the pole, there are 2 toggles on each corner. So there is 8 toggles in total. So 2 on each corner for 4 corners. Then there is a toggle as well on the cross pole at the top of the tent. At each end of that cross pole, there is a toggle where the fly attaches with just a little circular loop, and the toggle goes through and locks in, and that sort of holds the fly in place really well. And what it also means is that because the toggles attach to the fly where the guy lines attach on the exterior of the fly, so you've got the toggles on the inside, the guy line attachments on the outside at the same point. What it does is when there is wind pulling on those guy lines, it transfers that weight straight through the fly to the pole, and it's pulling on the pole. It's not pulling just on the fly fabric. And what I've found in the past with a lot of tents is that they've got those very flimsy Velcro attachments that wrap around the pole, and they tear off straight away. They come off the pole. You've got to constantly reattach them when you're out in the wilderness, and they just really don't do the job. And what you get happening is you get the guy lines just pulling on the fly to the point where in really windy conditions at night, the guy line can just rip out of the fly altogether, and I have had that happen before. So this system from SlingFin just really helps transfer that force from the wind on the fly to the pole, and then I guess down to the ground where the stakes are as well. But it just stops the fly taking the full brunt of any wind force and helps transfer it all around the tent and distribute the force. So I think that sort of toggle system they've employed here will greatly reduce sort of any chances of guy lines ripping out from the fly when you've got big forces of winds blowing on the fly. I think that is a really good feature. It's really simple feature to implement when they're building the tent, and it just seems very straightforward, and hopefully a lot of other tent manufacturers will do a similar sort of system where you've got stronger attachment to the poles with the fly. Now inside the tent there's plenty of pockets. So there's 3 ceiling pockets, 2 head pockets, 2 side pockets, and 1 foot pocket. I think that foot pocket is it's that big sort of one that goes all the way along that foot wall. We found that good. We preferred to keep that actually at our heads just because we could chuck a shirt or a jacket or something in there. We didn't run out of space with pockets at all with 2 people. We had plenty of room, lived like kings. It was really good. And we found the number of pockets for 2 of us more than enough, and I think with 3 it would be fine also. In terms of materials, what the actual tent itself is made of, now this is something that I have read into a bit. Hopefully I've got a bit of an understanding that I can explain it to you, but it is made of materials and coatings that I haven't really been able to find on other tents. I think maybe Mountain Hardware, according to SlingFin, because it was founded by the same person, are basically the only other company doing this at the moment that I can see. Now SlingFin claims, and I quote from their website, "Our 10D nylon 66 ripstop silicone coated fly sheet fabric is basically magic with better UV resistance than fabrics 3 times its weight." So what they have done with their fly sheets is they have coated both sides of the fly sheet in silicone. A lot of companies will only cover maybe one side in silicone and the other side in a polyurethane. So basically what that means, the fly sheet of the SlingFin tents, I think it's all of them, I haven't checked that, but definitely of this one, is that it's a ripstop fabric. It's, you know, that fabric with the grid-like pattern, but this fly sheet is coated on both sides with silicone, a silicone coating. Most well, the majority of companies don't do that. They might coat one side with silicon and they will coat the other side with a product called polyurethane. And from what I can tell, there is a couple of reasons other companies would be doing it that way. A, it is cheaper. It reduces the cost significantly to make a tent that's got a polyurethane coating. Silicon, coating a tent with silicon, my understanding is that is an expensive process. It can add quite a bit in terms of cost, which is probably why the SlingFin tents do cost a bit more. But coating both sides in silicon gives the advantage in that there will be minimal degradation. From what SlingFin have researched from their website and what I've read is that degradation of material is much, much less, and you won't get that old musty tent smell from when it has been stored away. Having a double coated silicon fly sheet also greatly reduces any chance of water absorption, more so than with a polyurethane coating, and that leads to a quicker dry time and greatly increases any chance of mold or mildew forming when the tent is stored. The silicon coating will not break down when it is stored, whereas if you've had a tent for many years and you'll start seeing that coating breaking down, that is probably because it's polyurethane, and that over time will gradually break down and also produce that old tent smell. So yeah, that is the fly sheet. It is a 10D nylon 66 ripstop fabric that has this silicon coating. And I probably will mention the Big Agnes copper spur on this video a little bit, because that was the other tent we took on this trip. I have one of them as well, and I've used it a lot. Big fan of that tent as well, but I just sort of discovered these differences as I've been researching for this video. And in terms of the actual inner part of the tent itself, that is the bit with the mesh and the solid bottom. So the floor fabric is made out of a 20D ripstop nylon, so a slightly stronger ripstop than the fly sheet. And the difference with this floor fabric compared to other tents, again, is a specialized coating that isn't often used. And again, most companies would be using a polyurethane coating on the floor, on the base of tents, whereas SlingFin are using a PolyEther coating on the floor. When other companies are talking about the polyurethane, they're generally talking about a polyester urethane fabric, whereas SlingFin are using a PolyEther urethane fabric. Now, why use polyether urethane in a tent like this? Well, again, on the SlingFin websites, they've got a good little article about it. I'll leave a link to that below, but here is a couple of points from their website. First, it does not absorb water like the polyester urethane coatings do. It's hydrophobic, and even when left in prolonged contact with water, it doesn't wet out, even when compared to a PU fabric, polyester urethane fabric, with a better water column. The main benefit of this in terms of durability is that PE coated fabrics are extremely mold mildew resistant because the coating keeps the fabric dry on the inside, so there's no moisture to support mold growth. If long-term durability is a concern for you, or you're mostly going to be using your tent in hot, humid places, look into a tent with PE coated fabrics, that is polyether. PE coatings are not nearly as easy to come by, as they haven't yet been fully embraced by the industry. So that is a quick rundown of those materials used in the tent. I thought that was kind of interesting. I only discovered that after I bought the SlingFin. I bought it for other reasons, not for that coating, but I'm glad I did now. And you can tell the difference in that fly sheet fabric when you feel it. You really notice a difference compared to most other tents that I have tried. You can really feel the texture, and to me, it just feels like a better material. And when I read this article, all of a sudden it all made sense as to why it does feel like a better material. Because it is. So all that technical stuff aside, how did it perform for me on my 9-day expedition? Well, in terms of weather durability, the SlingFin Portal 3 was a great shelter against the storms we faced on this trip, and we did really put it to the test. Its ability to withstand gale-force winds and heavy rains while keeping us dry and sheltered was actually pretty remarkable. The numerous skyline attachment points played a pivotal role, and they provided great support, especially on the first night. The wind came in, the rain came in, it got pretty crazy, and at that point in time I wasn't making use of one particularly good feature, but the tent still did stand up really well that night in very, very strong winds. And to give you an idea, I had a look at some weather reports while we were out on this trip. On the first night, on the nearest sort of weather stations that were in view of our walk most of the time, so I'm looking at here a weather station called Mount Reed on the west coast of Tasmania. It's renowned for heavy rain, high winds, and we could see that point, that mountain, on our trip for most of the trip. So take it with a grain of salt, but the wind recording top gust for the month of February, and for our first night on this trip, the highest gust recorded that month was that night, at Mount Reed. 35 kilometers from where we were camped on night 1 was recording wind gusts. The biggest gust it recorded was 126 kilometers per hour. That many miles per hour. Big wind gusts. Some of the bigger ones I've experienced, I would say, we were probably a little bit less than that. Not too much less. But just to give you an example, that was the sort of winds we were out there in amongst that first night. And the Portal 3 stood up to it really well. And it didn't even have the hiking pole additional supports that we employed later in the trip. Now, we did get some sort of blowing into the tent. It would, distort a bit. But those 10 guy line points were all out that night. They held it together well, and the tent really performed well on that first night. The first test we gave it was brutal weather, and it held up really well. Now, on that point, there is also the option, and this was probably the main thing that converted me to buying a SlingFin. The main thing that probably converted me to a SlingFin user was the fact I could get my walking poles, my trekking poles, if I wanted, and add them into the structure of the tent as additional support in addition to the poles that come with the tent. And when I watched a video on the SlingFin website with this, I looked at that and saw that, and I thought, that is a game changer. I'm going for this tent. And later in the trip, when more wind came along, we employed this into the structure of the tent. The poles pop on very easily to the cross bar that goes across the top of the tent. There is a Velcro strap that goes around the handle of your walking pole, and you sit it there beside the entrance. Each entrance has a pole. Now, in the way, that could be a little inconvenient, I guess, but the stability and the extra structure it gives to the tent is quite incredible. And again, later in the trip, on day 5, we again experienced very heavy rain, extreme winds. We were in a moderately sheltered campsite, but the wind was absolutely bombing through. Now, in terms of the tent body, now it is a full mesh tent apart from a small bit of sort of polyester in the roof, but it is a full mesh tent. It's made from 15D nylon, no CM mesh. It's a mesh tent, basically. Not a huge fan of them in the past because it allows drafts and things in, but I honestly didn't have any trouble with that. We had no dripping, we had no leaks, no condensation forming. It performed really well, and I would take this out in pretty much most conditions in Tasmania, unless I was going into deep snow. But having said that, you see video on the SlingFin website with them set up in the snow. It's built to withstand sort of snowfall, that sort of thing. So take that for what you will. The poles are strong. They are a DAC Featherlight NFL 9.3mm pole and one PL 10.65mm pole, if that stuff means anything to you. They were good poles. Like the poles. In terms of space and comfort, well, we found it very comfortable with 2 people. I think it would be very tight with 3. I am using a 25-inch pad at the moment. You would not fit 3 25-inch pads in this thing. You would have to go down in size, and like I've said before, I value comfort, so I would only use this as a 2-man tent. Maybe if I was taking 2 of my kids, maybe I'd take it, but I doubt it. But it is definitely going to be my go-to tent for multi-day expeditions here in Tasmania moving forward. So, like I said at the start, what do I like about this tent? Well, I love this tent. I really do. It's really performing better than I could have expected. I'm really happy to have discovered the SlingFin brand. I think this is really well built. It is something I'll be using all the time in Tasmania. Just all those extra guy attachment points, the feature with the trekking poles, just the fly sheet itself is just, it's different to anything else I've used or felt. It feels quite unique, and it certainly lived up to the task that we just put it through. In terms of dislikes, what do I dislike about the tent? Well, it is expensive. It is an expensive tent. It is listed on the SlingFin website. Let's have a look here. Currently, it is listed for $600 on the SlingFin website. That's US dollars, so that's around $1,000, $1,100 Australian, roughly, very roughly. In Australia, you can buy it for about that $1,000 price. It is expensive, but I think it's probably worth it if you want something that's going to be really good at withstanding strong winds here in Tasmania. If you get a big Agnes, something like that, you're looking at around $700 or $800. So it is, it's 20 to 30% more, but I do think worth the investment if you're out trekking all the time doing big trips. Other things I'm not a huge fan of, well, the mesh inner, I would like to see an option where you've got a full polyester sort of inner where you've got a bit more coverage from wind and that sort of thing. That's not a major problem for me. I'm happy with this tent, so that if I would improve one thing, I'd maybe have the option of buying a solid inner, maybe. I probably would have purchased it, but whether or not I'd use it, I don't know. The only other thing I can maybe think of is that the fly zip goes down out to the apex of the tent, so you do have to reach quite a bit to unzip the tent and to zip it up, but that is a common feature of many of these style of tents. This is basically the same sort of shape and setup as a Big Agnes or the older MSR Mother Hubbers. That is something you see on all those tents, so take that for what you will. That is one improvement. Maybe one day you'd have a zip coming down closer into the tent, so I could just reach just outside the door and zip it up like this. But again, I'm just trying to nitpick here. Overall, fantastic tent. And well, the question on everyone's lips is probably, is it up to the award that the Adventure Allen blog have given it this year? That award being most bomber tent. Well, I'm gonna have to say, given the round upper tents they've got in there, they've got the Nemo Dragonfly, they've got the Big Agnes Copper Spur, they've got the Hubba Hubba, got a few of the tents I mentioned. Man, this thing, most bomber tent for sure. Out of those ones that I've tried on that list, it is by far the most bomber tent for Tasmanian conditions, for windy conditions, for heavy rain conditions. I love this thing and I will be using it into the future. So if you like that video, then check out this one where I go into how to select your perfect tent. But in the meantime, well, time to go and have a shave and get back to work and maybe make a few more videos. All right, hope you enjoyed that video and I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.